You know that moment when your father treats you like a spare tire? Not even the high-quality kind that comes with the rim, but one of those pathetic, yellow-rimmed donuts that warns you not to exceed 50 miles per hour. Yeah, that was my Tuesday morning. I sat in the Holt Logistics boardroom, a space designed with enough brushed steel and floor-to-ceiling glass to make a person feel like they were living inside a high-end watch. Sunlight glinted off the mahogany table, hitting me right in the eyes, which I took as a personal grievance from the universe. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. And my father, Barrett Holt, stood at the head of the table. At 62, he possessed the kind of tan that suggested he spent more time on a yacht than in an office, yet he wore his authority like a tailored suit that never quite went out of style. Beside him sat Ethan, my stepbrother. Ethan is 28 and possesses the intellectual depth of a puddle in a parking lot. He was currently wearing a smirk that I desperately wanted to file down with a belt sander. "Griffin," Barrett said, his voice carrying that resonant, practiced gravitas that usually preceded a lecture on the Holt legacy. "The merger with Sterling Vane is the most significant move this company has made in a decade. It requires a specific kind of energy, a public-facing charisma that Ethan has been cultivating quite successfully." I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. I kept my face a mask of bored indifference, though my mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating the server load of the licensing database. "Energy," I repeated, tasting the word like a sour grape. "Is that what we're calling incompetence now? Because last I checked, Ethan couldn't explain the difference between a cloud-based API and a physical weather formation." Ethan's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, but Barrett slammed a hand on the table. The sound echoed through the sterile room. "That's enough. You're being benched, Griffin. You'll handle the legacy maintenance for the Midwestern accounts. Ethan will take the lead on the proprietary software integration for the merger. I want your login credentials for the primary architecture handed over to him by the end of the business day." This was the moment. The betrayal wasn't just the demotion, it was the theft. My father wasn't just sidelining me, he was handing the keys to my life's work, the Holt Path logistics algorithm, to a man who used a highlighter on his computer screen. "I see," I said, keeping my voice level. I didn't let my pulse quicken. I didn't let my eyes narrow. In the world of high-stakes corporate maneuvering, the first person to show emotion is the one who has already lost. You want the architecture. You want the patents. You want me to apologize for being difficult and go sit in a corner while you hand my crown to the crown prince of mediocrity. "I want you to be a team player," Barrett corrected, his eyes cold. "If you can't do that, perhaps your future here is more limited than even I anticipated." I looked at Ethan. He was practically vibrating with unearned triumph. He thought he had won. He thought that because he had the CEO's favor, he had the power. He didn't realize that in a digital age, power doesn't reside in a title or a corner office. It lives in the lines of code that keep the lights on and the trucks moving. "All right," I said. The word hung in the air, unexpected and flat. Barrett blinked. He had expected a fight, a scene, perhaps a dramatic exit. Instead, I just gave him a thin, professional smile. "All right?" Ethan asked, his voice an annoying tenor. "Just like that?" "Just like that," I replied, standing up and buttoning my jacket. If the board feels that Ethan is the right choice for the future of Holt Logistics, who am I to argue with the collective wisdom of a group whose average age is 75? I'll have the transition documents prepared. I walked out of the boardroom, my footsteps muffled by the expensive carpet. I didn't head to my office. Instead, I took the elevator down to the basement levels, where the air was cooler and the hum of the servers provided a steady, comforting rhythm. This was my sanctuary. While Barrett was busy playing golf and Ethan was busy trying to find his own reflection in every mirror he passed, I had built the nervous system of this empire. I sat down at my terminal and began to work. My fingers moved across the keys with a grace that felt almost musical. I wasn't destroying anything, not yet. I was simply reclaiming what was mine. 2 years ago, when I drafted the licensing agreements for the Holt Path algorithm, I'd inserted a very specific, very legal keyman clause. It stated that the intellectual property licenses were contingent upon my active role as the Chief Technology Officer with full administrative oversight. If my role was diminished or my credentials transferred without a specific set of secondary protocols, the licenses would enter a revocation grace period. It was a legal time bomb, buried under 10,000 pages of boilerplate corporate jargon. And Barrett, in his arrogance, had signed it without reading the fine print, assuming his son would never have the nerve to use it against him. As I worked, my inner narrator, that cynical voice that kept me company during late-night coding sessions, started to chime in. "Look at them," it whispered. "They think they can just swap out the engine and keep the car running. They think you're a spare part. But you're not the spare tire, Griffin. You're the fuel pump, and you just turned off the flow." I accessed the central patent repository. There it was, the document my father had pressured me to sign months ago, transferring the proprietary rights to a holding company he controlled. He thought he'd secured the bag, but he hadn't accounted for the fact that I'd written the software that managed that repository. A few keystrokes later, and the transfer was flagged for administrative review due to a clerical error I had just invented. It would take their legal team weeks to untangle the digital knot, and by then, the merger would be a smoking ruin. A shadow fell over my desk. I didn't look up. I knew the scent of expensive perfume and corporate ambition anywhere. "You're taking this surprisingly well," Maya Chen said. She was a corporate strategist who had once been my closest confidant at the firm. We had shared drinks, secrets, and late-night brainstorming sessions. Now she was Ethan's primary advisor, having jumped ship the moment she smelled the change in the wind. "I'm a professional, Maya," I said, still watching the scrolling lines of code. "The company needs to move forward. If I'm the friction, I should be removed." "You're never the friction, Griffin. You're the gravity," she said, leaning against the edge of my desk. There was a hint of something in her voice. Regret? Or maybe just calculation. "Barrett is making a mistake, but Ethan is pliable. You could have worked with him." "I don't work with pliable," I said, finally looking up. My eyes were as cold as the server racks behind me. "I work with functional. There's a difference." Maya narrowed her eyes. She was smart, smarter than Barrett and Ethan combined. She knew me well enough to know that this calm wasn't a sign of defeat. It was the eye of the storm. "What are you doing, Griffin?" "Just cleaning up my files," I said, clicking the final execute command on a script. I wouldn't want to leave a mess for the new leadership. She lingered for a moment, her gaze darting to my screen, but I had already toggled the display to a generic system diagnostic. With a sharp nod, she turned and walked away, her heels clicking a rhythmic warning on the concrete floor. I waited until she was gone, then I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a small, encrypted drive. It contained the blueprints for my own future, a startup I had been quietly funding in the shadows for 18 months. It was a leaner, faster, more intelligent version of Holt Logistics. All I needed was a reason to leave. Barrett had just handed me a golden invitation on a silver platter. I began the process of clearing my physical desk. I didn't have much, a few technical manuals, a customized mechanical keyboard, and a framed photo of my mother, who had been the only one to see Barrett for what he truly was before she left him 20 years ago. I left the expensive desk ornaments and the CTO of the Year trophy. They were weights I no longer needed to carry. As I stood up, my phone vibrated. A text from Liam Porter, my tech lead. "The key man triggers are live. Legal is going to have a fit when they try to file those merger papers tomorrow morning. You okay?" I typed back a single word. Peachy. I walked toward the exit, passing the rows of cubicles where employees worked under the flickering fluorescent lights, oblivious to the fact that the ground beneath their feet was about to shift. I felt a strange sense of lightness. For years, I had tried to earn the respect of a man who viewed people as assets to be depreciated. I had tried to protect a legacy that was built on ego rather than innovation. I reached the lobby. The security guard, an older man named Mike, who I'd known for a decade, gave me a confused look as I walked toward the revolving doors with my small box of belongings. "Leaving early today, Mr. Holt?" he asked. "I'm going on a long overdue vacation, Mike," I said, stopping to look back at the towering glass monolith that bore my family name. "And I think the weather is about to get very interesting." I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. The city was loud, chaotic, and full of potential. Behind me, in the high-altitude silence of the boardroom, my father was likely raising a glass of scotch to his own brilliance. He was celebrating a victory that was already turning to ash. He wanted a war, but he had brought a pen to a digital conflict. I walked toward my car, a faint smirk finally touching my lips. They thought they had benched me. They thought they had taken my throne. They didn't realize that I hadn't just left the building, I had taken the foundation with me. The underground office I call my lab is located in the basement of a converted warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. It smells of ozone, expensive cooling fans, and the bitter dregs of high-end espresso. While the Holt Logistics headquarters is all glass and performative transparency, this place is solid brick and encrypted shadows. I sat at my primary workstation, a 3-monitor setup that looked more like a flight deck than a desk, and watched the status bars crawl across the screens. I wasn't just angry, I was precise. Anger is a blunt instrument, but precision is a surgical tool. My father, Barrett, always said that the strength of a company lies in its reputation. He was wrong. The strength of a modern company lies in its dependencies. If you control the dependencies, you control the organism. "You're brooding again," a voice crackled through the intercom. I looked up to see Liam Porter on the monitor to my left. He was sitting in his own apartment, surrounded by empty soda cans and glowing hardware. Liam had been my right hand for 7 years. He was the kind of programmer who saw code as a living language, and he was the only person I trusted with the back-end architecture of what I was about to do. "I'm not brooding, Liam," I said, my fingers hovering over the mechanical keyboard. "I'm calibrating. There's a difference." "Right. And I'm not a caffeine addict. I'm a hydration specialist," Liam shot back, his dry humor cutting through the tension. "I just saw the internal memo Ethan sent out. He's already calling himself the architect of the new era. It's nauseating. He's planning a press conference for the merger announcement tomorrow at noon." "Let him plan it," I said. I felt a cold, sharp satisfaction blooming in my chest. "He's building a house on a foundation I've already turned into sand. Did you verify the Keyman triggers in the Midwestern server cluster?" "Locked and loaded," Liam confirmed. "The moment they try to authenticate the Sterling vein data migration, the system is going to look for your biometric signature. When it doesn't find it, the licensing protocols will revert to restricted status. It's all perfectly legal, Griffin. It's right there in the end-user license agreement they signed when the holding company took over the patents." "Barrett never reads the EULAs," I murmured. "He thinks they're for the little people." The plan was a masterpiece of corporate architecture. I wasn't hacking Holt Logistics. You can't hack something you own. I was simply enforcing the terms of my own employment contract. The software that ran their entire fleet, the routing algorithms, the fuel efficiency trackers, the real-time warehouse management, was licensed to the company by a shell corporation I controlled. By demoting me and attempting to seize my credentials, they had triggered a breach of contract that would render the software unusable for high-stakes integration. I spent the next 4 hours navigating the labyrinthine security protocols of my former employer. It was a cat-and-mouse game, even if the cat didn't know I was in the room yet. Every time the internal IT monitoring system swept the network, I had to mask my activity behind legitimate maintenance pings. It was a high-wire act. If they caught me now, they could claim industrial espionage. But if I stayed invisible, it was just a system malfunction. The tension was a physical weight in the room. Every time a red alert light flashed on my diagnostic screen, I felt my jaw tighten. I wasn't just fighting for my work, I was proving a point. My father had spent 30 years building an empire on the idea that people are interchangeable. I was about to show him that some parts are foundational. Around 2 a.m., I initiated the revocation of licensing sequence. I didn't press a big red button, I just hit enter on a line of command text. Across the city, in the silent, dark server rooms of Holt Logistics, the digital locks began to slide into place. The systems wouldn't stop immediately. That would be too obvious. Instead, they would begin to degrade. A lag in the routing here. A synchronization error there. By tomorrow morning, the entire network would be wading through digital molasses. I stood up, my joints popping after hours of stillness. I needed to move. I grabbed my jacket and headed out into the night. The city at night is a different world. The corporate towers are just husks of steel and light, stripped of the frantic energy that defines them during the day. I drove past the Holt Logistics HQ. It looked so permanent, so unassailable. I imagined Barrett in his penthouse, dreaming of his merger, completely unaware that his crown was already slipping. I returned to my lab as the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gray. I didn't sleep. I didn't feel tired. I felt focused. At 8 a.m., the first signs of the collapse began. Liam called me, his voice high with excitement. "It's starting. The regional managers are calling the help desk. The fleet optimization software is returning license not found errors. Ethan is currently in the server room, probably trying to figure out if he can fix it by unplugging and plugging it back in." "What about the legal department?" I asked, sipping a lukewarm coffee. "They just got the physical delivery," Liam said. "The revocation of licensing letter. Hand-delivered by a courier 5 minutes ago. Your lawyer really knows how to time things." I opened a private feed I still had into the building's security cameras, a parting gift I'd left for myself. I watched the executive floor. It was a hive of activity. Assistants were running back and forth with folders. I saw Barrett emerge from his office, his face a shade of crimson that I could see even through the grainy resolution of the camera. He looked frantic. He looked human. Then I saw Ethan. He was standing by the mahogany table where he had mocked me only 24 hours ago. He was holding a tablet, tapping at it with increasing desperation. He looked like a child trying to solve a puzzle that was missing half the pieces. The re-hook happened an hour later. A notification popped up on my screen. It was an internal memo marked urgent and confidential. Barrett was calling an emergency meeting of the board. He was going to try to bypass the licensing by force, using a back door he thought Maya had discovered. He's going for the override, I told Liam. He can't override it, Liam said. The encryption is nested. If he tries to force it, the system will just dump the cache and lock the hardware for 48 hours. He doesn't know that, I said. He thinks he can bully the code the same way he bullies his employees. I watched as the board members filed into the room. These were the men and women who had sat in silence while Barrett humiliated me. They were the ones who had prioritized their dividends over the integrity of the company. I felt no pity for them. The climax of the morning came when the head of IT, a man who had always been a sycophant to my father, approached the head of the table. I could see him shaking his head. I could see the frustration in Barrett's gestures. He was shouting now. The glass walls of the boardroom didn't muffle the visible fury. I leaned back in my chair, watching the screens. This was the first phase of the revenge. It wasn't about ruin, not yet. It was about realization. I wanted them to understand exactly what they had discarded. I wanted them to feel the weight of their own inadequacy. Then, the door to the boardroom burst open. A woman in a sharp gray suit marched in. It was the lead counsel for Sterling Vane, the merger partner. She didn't look happy. She dropped a stack of papers on the table and pointed at them. "They've found the key man clause," I whispered to the empty room. The merger was predicated on the stability of the intellectual property. If the software was in a licensing dispute, the value of the company plummeted. The energy Ethan brought to the table was currently costing them $300 million in projected valuation. I watched Barrett's face go pale. He slumped into his chair. The fire suddenly drained out of him. He looked old. For a moment, a flicker of something like guilt touched me. But then I remembered the way he had looked at Ethan, the pride he had shown for a man who had done nothing to earn it, and the feeling vanished. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It went to the executive assistant's desk. "Holt Logistics, how can I help you?" "This is Griffin Holt," I said, my voice smooth and professional. "I understand there might be some technical difficulties with the logistics platform. I'm calling to remind the CEO that I've cleared my desk, as requested. My revocation of licensing letter should explain the rest. Have a productive day." I hung up before she could respond. "That was cold," Liam said over the intercom. "Even for you." "It's not cold, Liam. It's a correction," I replied. "They wanted me out. I'm out. But they forgot that I'm the one who holds the map to the minefield." I checked the time. It was nearly noon. The press conference was supposed to start in 10 minutes. I pulled up the public news feed. There was a podium set up in the lobby of the Holt building, surrounded by microphones and cameras. Reporters were milling about, checking their watches. But there was no Ethan. There was no Barrett. The screen stayed empty for 5 minutes, then 10. Finally, a PR representative walked out, looking like she wanted to be anywhere else on the planet. She announced that the press conference had been postponed due to scheduling conflicts. The stock price ticker at the bottom of the screen took a sharp dip. "One domino down," I said. I looked at my monitors. I had a whole row of them left to topple. Maya was next. She was the one who had provided the legal loophole Barrett thought he was using. She had betrayed our friendship for a seat at the table, and now I was going to make that seat very uncomfortable. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door. The first act was over. The betrayal had been met with a response they never saw coming. But the real work, the work of building something new while the old world crumbled, was just beginning. As I climbed into my car, I saw a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Now." I deleted the message without replying. I didn't need to talk. I had already said everything I wanted to say in the language of the 21st century. I drove away from the warehouse, heading toward the heart of the city. I had a meeting with a group of investors who were very interested in a new logistics startup, one that didn't have the Holt name, but had all of the Holt brains. The war wasn't over. It was just moving to a larger map. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the compass. The launch of a company is usually a noisy affair, filled with champagne flutes and forced networking. My new venture, Vanguard Systems, launched with the quiet intensity of a predator hitting the tree line. We didn't have a skyscraper or a mahogany boardroom. We had a rented floor in a tech incubator that smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and ambition. While the fallout at Holt Logistics continued to saturate the business news feeds, I sat in my new office, a glass-walled rectangle that offered a panoramic view of the very empire I was systematically dismantling. Liam was in his element. He had successfully migrated the core architecture of our new platform to a decentralized server network that even Barrett's most expensive consultants wouldn't be able to touch. 80%, Liam said, spinning around in his ergonomic chair. He held up a tablet displaying a real-time revenue graph. 80% of the top-tier clients at Holt Logistics have initiated inquiries with us in the last 6 hours. The moment their systems lagged and those license errors popped up, they went looking for a lifeboat. We just happened to be the only ship in the harbor. I looked at the list of names. These were accounts I had nurtured for a decade. They weren't loyal to the name on the building. They were loyal to the code that ensured their shipments arrived on time. It's not enough to take the revenue, Liam, I said, my voice low and focused. I want the talent too. Send the recruitment packets to the senior engineering team. Offer them equity and a culture that doesn't treat them like biological hardware. Consider it done, Liam replied, his fingers already dancing across his keyboard. But you've got a visitor in the lobby. She didn't sign the guest log, and she's currently intimidating the intern. I didn't need to check the security feed to know who it was. Maya Chen was not the type to wait for an invitation when her world was vibrating. I walked out to the reception area where the air felt 5 degrees cooler just by her presence. She was dressed in a charcoal suit that looked like armor, her eyes scanning our modest setup with a mixture of professional curiosity and barely contained fury. Griffin, she said, her voice like silk over gravel. I see you've been busy. This place is charmingly industrial. It's functional, Maya, I said, gesturing toward my office, which is more than I can say for the executive floor at Holt right now. Please, come in. I'd offer you water, but we're still working on the plumbing. She followed me into the glass office, the door clicking shut with a definitive sound. She didn't sit. She stood by the window, looking out at the city. The board is in a full-blown panic. Sterling Vane pulled their letter of intent an hour ago. The stock is in a free fall, and Barrett is currently locked in his office with 3 different legal teams. You didn't just walk away, Griffin. You pulled the thread that held the whole tapestry together. I simply exercised my contractual rights, I said, leaning against my desk. If the tapestry falls apart because one thread is removed, it wasn't a very well-made tapestry to begin with. Maya turned to face me, her expression hardening. You're hurting people, Griffin. Good people who have nothing to do with your grudge against your father. Don't talk to me about people, Maya, I countered, my voice sharp. You were the one who helped Ethan draft the patent seizure documents. You were the one who told Barrett that I was manageable. You didn't care about the people then? You cared about the promotion you were promised once the merger went through. How does that seat on the board look now that the board is a sinking ship? For a moment, the corporate mask slipped, and I saw the calculation behind her eyes. She knew I had her. I had documentation of her side dealings with Ethan, promises of kickbacks disguised as consulting fees that would make the SEC very interested in her career. I came here to offer you a way out, she said, though the conviction in her voice was wavering. Barrett is willing to reinstate you, full CTO power, a seat on the executive committee. He'll even sideline Ethan. I laughed, a short, dry sound that lacked any real humor. He's not offering me a way out. He's offering me a bucket so I can help him bail out his sinking boat. Tell him I'm not interested in being a savior. I'm quite enjoying being the alternative. Maya stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. You think you're safe here. Barrett has resources you haven't even considered. He won't let you ruin him. He already let me, I said. He let me because he underestimated me, and so did you. I reached into my desk and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the glass surface. In there, you'll find a summary of your communications with the Sterling Vane analysts, specifically the ones where you shared internal Holt Logistics trade secrets to grease the wheels for the merger. That's a felony, Maya. If I were you, I'd spend less time worrying about Barrett's empire and more time finding a very good lawyer who specializes in white-collar defense. Maya stared at the folder but didn't touch it. The silence in the room became heavy, pressurized. The psychological warfare had reached its peak. She realized that I wasn't just defending myself. I was dismantling her social and professional standing with surgical precision. You've changed, she said finally, her voice small. I grew up, I replied. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a company to run. I believe you know the way out. She left without another word, her footsteps echoing in the hallway. I watched her go, feeling a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about cruelty, it was about consequences. The afternoon brought a different kind of confrontation. I needed to see the wreckage for myself, but more importantly, I needed to face the second architect of my betrayal. I drove back to the Holt Logistics HQ, but I didn't go to the front door. I used my old executive key card at the freight entrance, a card they had surprisingly failed to deactivate in their haste. The building felt different. The usual hum of productivity had been replaced by a frantic, jagged energy. People were gathered in small groups, whispering. The air was thick with the scent of anxiety. I took the service elevator to the executive garage. I knew Ethan would be there. He always left early when things got difficult, retreating to his high-end sports car as if speed could solve his incompetence. I found him near his silver convertible, fumbling with his keys. He looked disheveled, his tie loosened, and his hair a mess. When he saw me step out from behind a concrete pillar, he jumped, dropping his keys on the pavement. "Griffin? What the heck are you doing here?" he stammered, his eyes darting toward the security cameras. "I just wanted to see how the new architect was holding up," I said, walking toward him. I didn't run. I didn't shout. I moved with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who had already won. "You did this," Ethan hissed, his fear turning into a weak, watery anger. "You sabotaged the servers. You ruined the merger. Dad is going to destroy you." "Your father can't even get his email to load right now, Ethan," I said, stopping a few feet away. I looked down at him, realizing for the first time how small he actually was. He had spent his whole life standing on the shoulders of giants, never realizing that the giants were the ones doing all the heavy lifting. "You wanted my job. You wanted my patents. Well, you have them. How's that working out for you? The clients are leaving, the software is locked, the investors are calling for your head on a platter." "It was just business," Ethan said, his voice cracking. "Dad said you were getting too powerful. He said you needed to be brought down a peg." "And you were happy to help," I said. "Because you're incapable of building anything of your own. You're a parasite, Ethan. And the problem with parasites is that they tend to starve when the host stops feeding them." Ethan reached for his keys, his hands shaking. "I'm calling security." "Go ahead," I said. "Tell them I'm here. While you're at it, tell them about the $3 million you misallocated from the expansion fund to cover your gambling losses in Macau. I found the ledger entries, Ethan. I've had them for months. I was going to help you fix it, back when I still thought you were my brother. But now, I think the board would be very interested to know why their architect is a thief." Ethan's face went a sickly shade of pale. He leaned against his car, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. No physical harm was necessary. The look in his eyes, the total, crushing realization of his own ruin, was far more satisfying than any physical confrontation could ever be. He wasn't just losing his job, he was losing the only identity he had. "Please," he whispered. "Don't." "I don't have to do anything," I said, turning away. "You've already done it to yourself. I'm just the one who turned on the lights so everyone could see." I walked back to the service elevator, leaving him standing in the shadows of the garage. My inner narrator was silent now, replaced by a cold, analytical clarity. The first two strikes had landed. Maya was neutralized, and Ethan was broken. But the heart of the machine was still beating. Barrett Holt was still sitting in his office, and I knew him well enough to know that he wouldn't go down without a fight. As I drove back toward my new HQ, I saw a notification on my dashboard, a series of urgent messages from the Holt Logistics main switchboard. My father was calling every 10 minutes. He wasn't texting anymore. He was demanding an audience. I ignored the calls. I had one more move to make before the day was over. I needed to ensure that the clients who had reached out to Vanguard Systems were locked in. I needed to turn their inquiries into contracts. When I arrived at the office, Liam was waiting for me with a grin that stretched from ear to ear. "The first contract just came through," he said, holding up a digital document. "It's the Miller Group. Their entire shipping network is now running on our beta platform. They've officially terminated their agreement with Holt." "Good," I said, sitting down at my desk. "Who's next?" "The Sterling Vane analysts are online too," Liam said, his eyes gleaming. "They don't want the merger anymore. They want an acquisition. They want to buy Vanguard." I looked at the phone, the light blinking steadily. This was the moment. I could sell, I could take the money and disappear, leaving the ruins of the Holt Empire behind me. But that wasn't the goal. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to replace. "Tell them we're not for sale," I said, picking up the receiver. "But tell them we're happy to discuss a strategic partnership that leaves Holt Logistics completely out of the equation." I leaned back in my chair, the city lights reflecting in the glass walls of my new world. The underdog hadn't just survived the betrayal, he had used it as fuel. The crown was gone, but I was starting to realize that I liked the view much better from the ground up. The atmosphere inside the Vanguard Systems office was a sharp contrast to the funeral march silence of the Holt building. Here, the air hummed with the sound of mechanical keyboards and the frantic, energized chatter of engineers who felt like they were finally on the winning team. We were the insurgents, and every line of code we pushed was a calculated strike against the monolith. I sat at my desk, watching a multi-layered map of the city's logistics flow. It looked like a living circulatory system, but instead of life-giving fluids, it moved freight, data, and capital. The financial escalation is complete, Liam said, leaning over my shoulder with a look of exhausted triumph. I've finished the audit on the misrouted contracts. Because of the licensing freeze we initiated yesterday, Holt's automated billing system started kicking back invoices to their primary vendors. To the vendors, it looks like Holt is insolvent or suffering a total systems collapse. They're jumping ship to us before the morning bell even rings. I nodded, my eyes fixed on a specific cluster of data. It's a cascade failure. Once the trust is gone, the contract is just a piece of paper. But Barrett is going to try one last play. He's calling an emergency board meeting for 3 o'clock. He's going to attempt to push through a stability vote to secure an emergency line of credit. Which would buy him time to hire a team to crack our encryption, Liam finished. Exactly. We aren't going to give him that time. I spent the next hour executing a series of layered sabotages that were as legal as they were devastating. I didn't need to break into their vault, I just needed to show the world that the vault was empty. I leaked the metadata of the licensing dispute to a select group of industry analysts. Not the documents themselves, but the system logs that proved the core software was no longer authorized for use. It was a digital no-occupancy sign hung on the front door of their main asset. By 2 p.m., the news was hitting the wires. The stock price of Holt Logistics wasn't just dipping, it was cratering. I watched the numbers tumble in real time, a jagged red line representing 40 years of my father's ego dissolving into digital nothingness. I need to be there, I said, grabbing my laptop. The board meeting? Liam asked, raising an eyebrow. You're not exactly on the guest list, Griffin. Security has been instructed to keep you out of the zip code, let alone the building. Security follows the credentials, I said, a thin smile touching my lips. And I haven't deactivated the override on the service elevator's maintenance mode yet. They think they've changed the locks, but I'm the one who designed the security architecture. I didn't leave a back door, I left a master key. The drive across the city was a race against the clock. The streets were congested, a gridlock of steel and exhaust that mirrored the internal state of the company I was about to visit. I parked 3 blocks away in a nondescript garage and walked the rest of the way, keeping my head down. I felt a strange surge of adrenaline, the kind that comes from knowing you are about to walk into the center of a storm you created. I entered through the loading dock, slipping past a distracted delivery driver. I reached the service elevator and punched in a sequence on the hidden maintenance panel. The doors opened with a soft chime. I rode the lift directly to the executive floor, bypassing the lobby and the frantic receptionists. When the doors opened, the chaos was audible. People were shouting into phones, running with stacks of paper, and looking generally terrified. I walked toward the boardroom, my stride purposeful. No one stopped me. In the middle of a collapse, everyone assumes the person moving with confidence is the one in charge. I reached the double mahogany doors of the boardroom and paused. I could hear Barrett's voice from inside. He was loud, booming, and desperate. "We just need 90 days, he shouted. "The software glitch is being handled by Ethan's team as we speak. Sterling Vane is still at the table. They're just renegotiating the terms. If we authorize the emergency credit line, we can stabilize the vendor relations and move forward." I pushed the doors open. The room went silent. The board members, 12 men and women in various states of agitation, all turned to look at me. At the head of the table, Barrett stood with his jacket off, his shirt sleeves rolled up, looking like a man who had spent the last 24 hours fighting a losing battle with a ghost. Maya sat to his left, her face a mask of calculated neutrality. "Griffin," Barrett breathed, his voice a mix of fury and something that sounded suspiciously like relief. "You have no right to be here. Get out before I have you escorted out in restraints." "I'm here as a significant minority shareholder, Father," I said, walking to the empty chair at the far end of the table. I sat down and opened my laptop, the screen glowing in the dim light of the room. And as someone who actually knows how to read a balance sheet. "You're lying to the board. Ethan's team isn't handling the glitch because there is no glitch. There is a total revocation of the intellectual property licenses. Every second you keep those servers running, you're committing a fresh act of copyright infringement. The Sterling Vane deal didn't just go sideways, it went into the ground. They're currently in the lobby of my office signing a partnership agreement with Vanguard." A murmur of shock rippled through the board. One of the older directors, a man named Sterling, who had known my father for decades, leaned forward. "Is this true, Barrett? Are the licenses actually revoked?" Barrett's face turned a deep, alarming shade of purple. "It's a technicality, a legal maneuver by a disgruntled former employee." "I'm not a former employee," I corrected, looking directly at Sterling. I'm the owner of the technology that makes this company worth more than the scrap value of its trucks. And I'm here to inform the board that I have just filed a formal injunction to freeze all Holt logistics operations until a full intellectual property audit is completed." The room erupted. 3 board members started talking at once, and Maya stood up, her eyes burning with a cold fire. "You're destroying the value of your own shares, Griffin. This is suicide." "No," I said, my voice cutting through the noise. "This is a restructuring. I'm not interested in the shares of a failing company. I'm interested in the future. And the future doesn't include a CEO who tries to steal from his own children or a strategist who sells trade secrets to the highest bidder." I turned my laptop around so the board could see the screen. I had prepared a presentation, but not the kind they were used to. It was a timeline of the last 48 hours, the attempted patent theft, the misallocated funds by Ethan, and the secret communications Maya had sent to the competition. It was a map of a betrayal so thorough that it left no room for defense. "You've been playing a game of Thrones," I told them, "but you forgot that the throne is made of code, and I'm the one who wrote the source." Barrett slammed his fist on the table. "I built this. I started this company when you were in diapers. You think you can just walk in here and take it?" "I don't want to take it, Barrett," I said, standing up. "I want you to watch it end. I want you to feel what it's like when the thing you love most, your power, simply stops responding to your commands." The tension in the room was so thick it felt like a physical pressure against my chest. This was the peak of the escalation. I had publicly embarrassed the man who valued his public image above all else. I had exposed the incompetence of his chosen heir and the duplicity of his closest advisor. There was no going back now. "The injunction will be served in 30 minutes, I said, closing my laptop. "I suggest you all start looking for new positions. The Holt name is officially toxic." I walked out of the room, my heart hammering against my ribs, though my face remained as still as stone. I didn't look back. I headed for the elevators, but I didn't go down. I went up. I needed to see one more thing. I reached the rooftop observation deck. The city stretched out below me, a sprawling grid of lights and movement. Somewhere down there, Ethan was probably hiding in a bar, and Maya was probably burning documents. And in the boardroom below, my father was realizing that his empire was a hollow shell. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from a private investigator I had hired weeks ago to look into the double betrayal I had sensed lurking in the background. It was a single image, a photograph of a document. My breath hitched as I looked at it. It wasn't a corporate contract. It was a trust agreement. It showed that my father had secretly been trying to sell the company's real estate assets, the very ground the warehouses stood on, to a private equity firm owned by his own sister. He wasn't just sidelining me. He was preparing to strip the company of its physical value and leave me with a shell of a tech department while he walked away with $1 billion real estate windfall. He had been planning to betray everyone, even Ethan. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I had thought I was fighting a war for my work, but I was actually fighting a man who had no loyalty to anything but his own bank account. He would have left us all with nothing. I looked out over the city, the wind whipping at my hair. The game had just changed. It wasn't about a corporate merger anymore. It was about a total, scorched earth exposure. I had been playing for the company. Now I was playing for the truth. I pulled out my phone and called Liam. "Change of plans," I said, my voice cold and hard. "Don't just freeze the servers. I want everything. Every email, every bank transfer, every secret ledger. We're not just stopping the merger, Liam. We're going to show the world exactly who Barrett Holt is." "I'm on it," Liam said, his voice mirroring my intensity. "What about the board?" "The board is about to find out they've been sitting on a powder keg," I said, "and I'm about to drop the match." I stood on the roof, watching the sun begin to set over the horizon. The final confrontation was near. I had no allies left in that building, and I didn't need any. I was Griffin Holt, and I was no longer a spare tire. I was the architect of the end. The finality of a collapsing empire doesn't sound like an explosion. It sounds like 1,000 digital whispers, the soft pings of declining credit cards, the frantic tapping of keys in a legal office, and the silence of a phone that has stopped ringing with offers. I was back in my lab, the atmosphere thick with the smell of scorched electrical components and stale coffee. Liam was hunched over his terminal, his face illuminated by the rhythmic pulse of a progress bar that was currently siphoning the last of the Holt executive server data. "The real estate trust documents are coming through now," Liam said, his voice tight with focus. "Your father didn't just set up a side deal. He created a series of nested shell companies designed to lease the company's own warehouses back to itself at 4 times the market rate. He was draining the operational budget to fill his private coffers. If that merger had gone through, Sterling Vane would have been buying a hollowed-out husk." I stared at the screen, watching the names of the entities scroll by. My father had always preached about the sanctity of the Holt name, but to him, the name was just a brand he was willing to sell for scrap. He isn't just a businessman who made a mistake, Liam. He's a scavenger. He was going to leave everyone, the employees, the board, even his own family, holding the bag while he retired to a private island on the proceeds of the real estate theft. "What's the move?" Liam asked, looking at me with a mixture of awe and concern. "The move is a face-to-face," I said, grabbing my tablet. "He's at the penthouse. He thinks he's still in control because he hasn't seen the final play yet. I want him to see it from me." I drove toward the heart of the city, the skyline looming like a jagged mountain range of glass and steel. The penthouse was located at the top of the Atlas Tower, a building my father had partially funded. It was a monument to his ego, a place where he could look down on the world and pretend he was the one keeping it spinning. I didn't use the service entrance this time. I walked straight through the lobby, my face set in a mask of grim determination. The security guard started to move toward me, but I simply held up my executive bypass card and kept walking. He hesitated, seeing the intensity in my eyes, and stepped back. The elevator ride to the top floor felt like an ascent into another realm. The pressure in my ears shifted, and the silence of the plush, carpeted car was absolute. When the doors opened, I was greeted by the scent of expensive cigars and aged leather. The penthouse was expansive, filled with art that looked more like investments than things meant to be enjoyed. Barrett Holt was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch in his hand. He didn't turn around when I entered. He looked like a king, watching his city burn from the safety of his palace. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice surprisingly calm. "You always were the sentimental one, Griffin. You couldn't just let the company go. You had to come back and try to save it." "I'm not here to save anything, Father," I said, stopping in the center of the room. "I'm here to show you the bill." He turned then, and I saw the toll the last 48 hours had taken. His eyes were bloodshot, and his suit was wrinkled, a rare lapse in his carefully curated image. "You think you've won because the stock price dropped? Markets fluctuate. I've survived recessions, strikes, and hostile takeovers. You're a brilliant coder, but you don't understand the stamina required to lead." "Stamina?" I countered, taking a step forward. "Is that what you call it when you funnel company assets into a private trust controlled by Aunt Catherine? Is that what you call it when you leave your own son to take the fall for $3 million in misallocated funds that you actually use to bridge the gap in your real estate payments?" Barrett's hand tightened around his glass. The calm mask finally cracked, revealing the predator beneath. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know everything," I said, tapping a command on my tablet. The massive television screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying a high-definition scan of the trust agreement I had seen on the roof. "I have the signatures, Barrett. I have the bank routing numbers. I have the recorded conversations between you and the private equity firm. I didn't just find a thread. I found the whole spool." "You would expose your own family?" he hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You would ruin the Holt name for a grudge?" "You ruined the name when you decided it was more valuable as a shroud than a banner," I said. "I'm just the one documenting the process." The confrontation was a verbal sparring match, an intellectual battle between two generations of the same stubborn bloodline. He tried to justify his actions as strategic repositioning, while I countered with the cold, hard logic of fiduciary duty and criminal liability. The air in the room felt pressurized, as if the very walls were closing in on his lies. "I'll make you an offer," Barrett said, his desperation finally showing. "I'll step down. I'll give you the chair. You can have the company, Griffin, just bury the files. We can tell the board it was a planned transition. You get the crown, and I get my dignity." "You still don't get it," I said, feeling a wave of pity for the man. "I don't want your crown. I already have a company that works. I already have the respect of the people who matter. I don't need your permission to lead." I walked toward the door, but stopped when I saw a second figure emerging from the hallway. It was Ethan. He looked small, his shoulders slumped, his eyes darting between me and our father. He had clearly been listening. "Is it true?" Ethan asked, his voice trembling. "Did you use my account to cover your own debts? Did you let me think I was a thief to protect yourself?" Barrett didn't answer. He just looked away, his silence a more damning admission than any confession. "You were never going to let me run the company," Ethan realized, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "I was just the distraction while you stripped the building bare." I looked at my stepbrother. For the first time, I didn't see a rival or an incompetent pretender. I saw another victim of Barrett's insatiable ego. "He was going to leave you with nothing, Ethan. The merger was never meant to succeed. It was meant to be the smokescreen for his exit." I turned back to Barrett. The board is meeting in an hour. I've already sent them the files. They're currently voting on your immediate removal for cause. There will be no retirement. There will be no dignity. There will only be the consequences of your choices." "You've destroyed us," Barrett whispered, looking out at the city he no longer owned. "No," I said. "I've liberated us. You just haven't realized it yet." I left the penthouse, the silence behind me feeling heavier than any shouting match could have been. I had one more stop to make before the final domino fell. I drove to a quiet, upscale bistro where Maya was waiting. She was sitting at a corner table, a glass of wine untouched in front of her. She looked like she had aged 5 years in a single day. "I heard about the board vote," she said as I sat down. "I assume my resignation is expected." "Expected? It's already been processed," I said. "But I'm not here to talk about your job, Maya. I'm here to offer you a choice. You can go down with Barrett, or you can provide a sworn statement regarding the trade secrets you shared. If you cooperate with the audit, I'll make sure the legal team knows you are acting under duress from the CEO. Maya looked at me, her eyes searching mine for any sign of a trap. "Why would you help me?" "Because you were a good friend once," I said. "And because I'm not interested in being a monster. I'm interested in being the person you all thought was too weak to fight back." She nodded slowly, the tension in her shoulders finally beginning to dissipate. "I'll testify. I have the emails he sent me. He threatened to ruin my reputation if I didn't facilitate the Sterling vein leaks." "Then we're done here," I said, standing up. As I walked back to my car, I felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The father was exposed, the stepbrother was broken, and the ex-friend was neutralized. There was no physical harm, no violence, only the devastating impact of the truth. I had dismantled an empire in 48 hours, and I had done it using nothing but the very tools they had tried to use against me. But the most satisfying part wasn't the ruin of my enemies. It was the realization that I was free. I wasn't the CTU of Holt Logistics anymore. I wasn't the difficult son or the spare tire. I was the founder of Vanguard Systems, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for anyone else's approval. I checked my phone. A text from Liam. "The final domino is ready. We're live in 5 minutes." The final domino was a public broadcast I had scheduled across the company's internal and external communication channels. It wasn't a manifesto. It was a simple, factual account of the company's financial state and the vision for Vanguard. It was the bridge for the employees who were currently terrified for their futures. I sat in my car, watching the clock. 3, 2, 1. Across the city, on thousands of screens, the image of my father's face was replaced by a simple, elegant logo. Vanguard. The message was clear. The era of the Holt Empire was over. The era of the architect had begun. I started the engine and drove toward my new office. The sun was setting, but I wasn't looking back. I was looking toward the horizon, where a new world was waiting to be built. The peak of the Revenge had been reached, and the air up here was surprisingly clear. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a sea of shimmering silk, polished silver, and the heavy, stagnant scent of old money. This was the annual Logistics and Infrastructure Gala, an event my father had used for decades as his private victory lap. Tonight, however, the atmosphere was brittle. The news of the board's emergency vote had already begun to leak into the upper echelons of the city's elite. People were standing in tight clusters, their voices hushed, their eyes darting toward the entrance. They were waiting for a wreckage, and I was the one who had choreographed the impact. I adjusted my cufflinks in the mirrored surface of the hallway. I wasn't wearing the standard corporate black tie. I had opted for a charcoal suit that felt more like a modern uniform, sharp, utilitarian, and utterly devoid of the pretension that defined the Holt brand. Behind me, Liam was checking a tablet, his face lit by the pale glow of the screen. "The server sync is complete," Liam whispered. "The moment you trigger the final sequence, every screen in this room will display the full audit of the real estate trust. We've also linked the live feed to the major financial news networks. By the time dessert is served, the Holt name will be a case study in corporate malpractice." "Is the recording ready?" I asked. "Crystal clear," Liam replied. "Maya's testimony, your father's admission in the penthouse, and the audio from the secret board meeting. It's all there. He can't deny the voice when it's his own." I nodded and stepped into the ballroom. The transition from the quiet hallway to the roar of the gala was like stepping into a pressure cooker. I saw the heads turn. I saw the whispers ignite like a trail of gunpowder. I walked through the crowd with a steady, unhurried pace. I wasn't an intruder. I was the guest of honor, even if the host didn't know it yet. At the far end of the room, on a raised dais, Barrett Holt stood at a podium. He was attempting to give a speech about resilience and the future of global trade. He looked brittle, his skin pale against the dark wood of the lectern. He was trying to project strength, but it was the strength of a hollowed-out tree. One good shove and the whole thing would splinter. Ethan was standing a few feet behind him, looking like a ghost in an expensive tuxedo. He had lost the smugness, replaced by a hollow-eyed stare that suggested he had finally realized he was a secondary character in his own life. Barrett saw me. He paused mid-sentence, his hand gripping the edge of the podium so hard his knuckles turned white. The silence stretched for a beat too long, and the audience began to shift uncomfortably. "And so," Barrett continued, his voice cracking slightly, "we look forward to a new chapter of innovation, and innovation requires honesty, Father," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the hall. I didn't need a microphone. The room was so silent you could hear the ice melting in the glasses. I walked toward the dais, the crowd parting like a receding tide. I reached the front and looked up at him. "You're talking about the future, but you're standing on a foundation you've already sold for parts. You're asking these people to trust a brand that you've personally liquidated." "Griffin," Barrett hissed, leaning toward the microphone to drown me out. "This is a private event. Security, please escort Mr. Holt out." "I wouldn't do that," I said, pulling a small remote from my pocket, "because the security protocols in this building and the digital displays currently being used for your presentation are now running on Vanguard architecture. You wanted to see the next generation of logistics? Here it is." I pressed the button. The massive LED screens behind Barrett, which had been displaying the Holt Logistics logo, flickered and changed. They didn't show charts or graphs. They showed a document, the real estate trust agreement, highlighted in red to show the diverted funds. Then, a second screen lit up with a video of Maya Chen, her face clear and resolute as she detailed the sabotage of the Sterling Vane merger. The room erupted. It wasn't a roar. It was a collective gasp of realization. The investors, the rivals, and the employees all saw the truth at the same moment. The prestige of the Holt name evaporated in the glow of the high-definition evidence. "This is a fabrication!" Barrett shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the audio that began to play over the ballroom's sound system. It was his own voice from the penthouse, cold and calculated. "You would ruin the Holt name for a grudge? I'll give you the chair. You can have the company, Griffin. Just bury the files." The recording looped once, twice, the words echoing off the gilded ceiling. Barrett slumped against the podium, the fire in his eyes replaced by a dull, flickering panic. He looked at the crowd, searching for a friendly face, a supporter, an ally. He found none. The men and women he had spent 40 years courting were already turning away, their phones out as they began the process of distancing themselves from the fallout. I turned my attention to Ethan. He was staring at the screens, his mouth slightly open. He looked at me, and for a second I saw a flicker of the brother I used to have. Then he looked at Barrett, and the realization of our father's ultimate betrayal seemed to settle into his bones. He didn't defend him. He didn't shout. He simply stepped off the dais and walked toward the exit, his head bowed. "It's over, Barrett," I said, stepping up onto the platform. I wasn't shouting. I was speaking with the calm finality of a judge delivering a verdict. "You wanted to keep the crown, but you forgot that a crown is just a piece of metal if no one believes in the head that wears it. You've lost the board. You've lost the investors. And you've lost the only thing you ever actually valued, your reputation." Barrett looked at me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated loathing. "You think you're better than me? You've destroyed your own inheritance." "I didn't destroy it," I said. "I moved it. Vanguard is taking over the Miller accounts, the Sterling Vane partnership, and the proprietary licenses. I didn't want the inheritance you were offering. I wanted the work. I wanted the integrity. You can keep the empty building and the lawsuits. I'll keep the future." I turned away from him and looked out at the room. This was the peak. The revenge was complete. There was no violence, no physical ruin, but the devastation was total. The empire was a hollow shell, and the man who built it was now a pariah in the city he thought he owned. I walked off the dais and toward the main doors. Liam was waiting for me, his face a mask of professional satisfaction. "The news is everywhere," Liam said. "The federal auditors are already requesting the files we uploaded. The merger is officially terminated, and the Holt stock is being suspended from trading." "Good," I said. "Let's go." We walked out of the Pierre Hotel and into the cool night air. The city felt different, lighter somehow. The weight of the Holt name, the burden of trying to earn the respect of a man who had none to give, had finally been lifted. I felt a surge of energy, a clarity of purpose that I hadn't felt in years. We reached my car, but I didn't get in immediately. I looked back at the hotel, where the blue lights of a security vehicle were now flashing near the entrance. The chaos was continuing inside, but I was no longer a part of it. I had triggered the last domino, and the resulting collapse was no longer my concern. "What now?" Liam asked, leaning against the door of his own car. We've got 100 new clients to onboard and a team to expand. We're going to be working 18-hour days for the next 6 months. Now, I said, looking up at the sky, we build something that actually lasts, something that isn't based on ego or theft. We build the system the way it was supposed to be built from the beginning. I got into the car and started the engine. The dashboard hummed to life, the Vanguard logo glowing softly on the screen. It was a clean slate. I had walked away from the wreckage of my past, and for the first time I wasn't looking in the rearview mirror. The revenge hadn't been an endpoint. It had been a clearing of the ground. The throne of Holt Logistics was shattered, but I didn't need a throne. I had a keyboard, a team, and a vision that no one could take from me. I drove away from the hotel, leaving the flickering lights and the frantic voices behind. The night was quiet, the road was open, and for the first time in my life, I was exactly where I was meant to be. The architect had finished the demolition, and the construction of the new world was already underway.